All right. Thank you, Sam. Appreciate it. Hello, everybody. As you're trickling in here, I'm Barb Horn. I'm a water resource specialist with Colorado Parks and Wildlife. Hopefully you can see my screen there. And I'm honored to do this with Samantha Briggs, who is the acting Clean Water Program Director of Isaac Walton League. She did an amazing job setting this up and will be hosting us here. And she just forgot to introduce herself and all the amazing work that she does with Isaac Walton League. Today's webinar is study design, developing a monitoring program that delivers results. Remember, this will be recorded, and if you do have the handout, it is interactive. It would be really good to get that and write stuff down, but again, you don't have to have it. You are looking at a picture of Ouray, Colorado from the past looking down, if anybody knows where that is. I'm glad you've been there, and if you haven't been there, welcome anytime. And I wish I could be, my favorite way to teach is really to be able to see everybody and to know and really be able to reflect back. But since we're on this virtual, please do write your questions to Sam. If we don't get them answered in the webinar, I'll make sure that we follow up and maybe get your questions answered. While we are going to be kind of delivering a overview of what study design is and how you actually develop a monitoring program that delivers results, I also wanted you to leave today with some hands-on things that you could use immediately. So welcome, and I'll start here with who am I? I like to show this slide because I've been around for a while, even though I don't look it, and that's a joke. You can laugh at my jokes even though I can't hear you laugh. Because I've been very blessed in my career. I started a volunteer monitoring program 30 years ago in Colorado. It's called the Colorado River Watch Network. We serve about 140 groups every year. We monitor around 500 rivers, sampling monthly for field data and metals and nutrients and macroinvertebrates once a year. We are a very robust program. We've been around a long time. Teachers stay in our program 20, 25 years. But I didn't get there by myself. So I have this local program. I got there because other people helped me get there, and I asked for help. And through my career, then I was involved at state monitoring council levels, a regional group called the Rocky Mountain Watershed Network that developed the basis of the study design workbook that we're going through here in an abbreviated way. I have been on the National Monitoring Council, the volunteer monitoring position. I was on the board of River Network for 9 years and did some work for them. All of these experiences gave me everything that I know and learn, and it's my obligation and honor to share it back. And I would just encourage that I'm not necessarily an expert. I know what I know through my experience, and we're all experts, and we all have something to offer each other, and I encourage us to network. And for you to take whatever I have to offer here, how it applies to you, there's no such thing as the way. There's just this way, in all of my experience, that I've figured out a way to kind of put this together with the help of a lot of others to make it more tangible so that we're more effective in achieving our goals. So I'm actually giving this presentation for the Water Data Collaborative, and there's a lot of words on the screen right here, but I'm going to make it a layman interpretation for you. What is and who is the Water Data Collaborative? We're a bunch of people collectively, non-NGOs and citizen science and volunteer monitors. They're basically just trying to do the best management practices out there in technology, in people organizing, to get our data to places that can be used to do things, to do our job, to do what we want to do the vision, the dream we have to create the waters that we want. That's what all these words say, basically. Why do we need a collaborative? When the Pisces Foundation kind of got together and created the Internet of Water, you can think of the Water Data Collaborative as the citizen science volunteer monitoring contribution to that data hub, to the the data being used. But we're so good and broad and diverse that we aren't exactly organized ourselves. So there needs to be at some levels, regional and national and local, where we are putting our efforts together to do things to increase our impact. And so that's what the Water Data Collaborative is about, is the citizen science volunteer monitoring side of things to help create this common pathway of resources up and down from the grassroots groups up and from the up folks back down to create a common lexicon and a shared framework of best management practices in our work so that we can better document, share our success stories, and get our work out there, as well as get access to resources that really leverage what we do. So basically, the Water Data Collaborative, simply put, is you guys all know how citizen science and volunteer monitoring gets started. Is a bunch of people get together, maybe around a beer, maybe around a crisis and a beer, and I call that the people hub, when people get together and they want to do good stuff. And so they get equipment, they get money, they start doing something, and they collect data. And now if that data got into some sort of collective data hub where it could be used over and over again, we're all moving towards our desired outcome. And that's really what the Data Collaborative is. It's all these large people networks doing good stuff, trying to get that to good places in order for all of us to deal with the threats we have to our water bodies and our quality of life. Right now, the Water Data Collaborative is a compilation of these large national networks like River Network, Isaac Walton League, Waterkeeper Alliance. Quasi is a data hub for real-time data. The Duke Institute is the organization that's sort of housing the larger Internet of Water. You can go on the website, waterdatacollaborative.org, and find out more. But the philosophy was if we got these large national networks together who each have their own constituents, that maybe we can come create something at a national level that would really help all of these groups across the country, whether you're part of these individual organizations or not. That's who we are now. We're trying to figure out how to grow and how to bring people in, and we're just birthing all of this, so don't feel like you've missed anything. You're at the right time in the right place. And that just...
Hey, Barb, just jumping in.
Yes.
We had a question from Claire if we will have access to a recording of this video conference afterwards. The answer to that is yes, we are recording it, and what we are doing is we will post that on our website, waterdatacollaborative.org. So everybody will have access to that and can share it from there.
Thank you, Claire, and thank you, Samantha. I just achieved one of my first learning objectives for this webinar, and that's for you to understand a little bit about who the Water Data Collaborative is and what we're doing. Now we're going to jump right into some content. If you do have the worksheet, on page 1, I've asked about an expectation for today, and I want you to write down a monitoring question you have, whether it's one in your existing program or one that you want to have for a program that you're starting. Just think of one monitoring question, and an example of a monitoring question might be, is my river healthy? Is the wastewater treatment plant impairing my waters? What's the dissolved oxygen level in my rivers? Is my fish safe to eat? The kinds of questions that we ask that when we go collect data, we hope the data answers. I'll give you a second just to write down a monitoring question you have, because we're going to work with that the rest of the day here. Now that you've heard a little bit about who we are, I want to ask, and Sam and I want to know a little bit about who you are. So this is going to be one of those raise your hand things on the webinar. We've got about 30 groups out there. So raise your hand if you are currently involved in whatever role you're in, an existing monitoring program. Maybe it's one you inherited, maybe it's one you started, maybe it's been 5 months old, maybe it's 30 years old. Are you part of an existing monitoring program? And raise your hand for that. Give everybody a second to find their hands. And Sam, you tell me when that poll looks kind of complete.
So far, we'll have folks, a couple more trickling in here. It looks like 8 people out of 26 right now have raised their hand.
All right. Very good. Sam's going to erase that poll. Shut all your hands down. And now I want to know out there in the listening audience, you want to start a program, you're not currently involved in one, but you're planning one, and maybe you're attending to learn some information about how to start one. Raise your hand if you're going to start a program in the nearest future, or as soon as you get that huge grant.
All right, so we have 4 out of 26, so about 15% of folks have their hands raised.
Okay. So then it's a big mystery who the other dozen are. So the next question is, are you a service provider that provides something to citizen science or volunteer monitoring programs? Maybe you provide funding, training, equipment, whatever it is. You might have a program and provide services, but are you a service provider to volunteer monitoring or citizen science monitoring programs?
So now we have 7 folks who are service providers out of 25, okay. So about 28%.
All right. And maybe a few of you are actually in the wrong webinar, but welcome anyways. So now what I want you to do is, this whole webinar is about designing your monitoring program to produce measurable results. And I want to know what your idea of a measurable result is. Whether you think you're producing it, you want to produce it, that doesn't really matter. I want you to write down, type in the chat. You got to do this in the chat so everybody can see it. What is an example of a measurable result that you are producing? And I want to see some of those, or you want to produce. And I don't know if I can see those, so I'm going to have you read those, Sam, to me as they come in.
All right, I'm not seeing any come in yet. Folks can raise their hand as well if they would like to be unmuted to talk about their measurable outcomes. We had 1, E. coli numbers. Thank you, okay. Henry. All right, Claire, do you have a question? I can go ahead and unmute you.
Not a question, but just a statement. I mean, we are trying to measure the impact of the capital grants that we provide to our 65 grantees. And we're doing that both for land protection and then also for restoration, agricultural BMPs and stormwater BMPs.
Great, thank you, Claire.
We're doing that through modeling and empirical data collection.
So what would be a measurable result from that, Claire? So if you get all that and you succeed, what's a result?
Well, so the initial results will be pounds of nitrogen, pounds of phosphorus, pounds of sediment removed or avoided on the land protection side. We have bigger goals down the road, but it'll probably take more years to get to those bigger goals. But that's the place to start the conversation.
Okay. So I think part of the problem we don't produce measurable results is that we don't know what they are, or we don't know exactly how to articulate or count them or identify them. So E. coli numbers, data from your analysis, from your models, pounds of nitrogen are more like outputs, and they are an outcome, but it's taking then to an end point, an action. Like, now that you know pounds of nitrogen, what are you going to do? Maybe you're going to target restoration or protection efforts, or maybe you'll finally get the wastewater treatment technology you need. So again, measurable results can be short-term to long-term. I'm guessing everybody on this phone call, one of your measurable results is you want clean, available water for your family and future and community. How do you make that a measurable result? A little steps of the way along, that's a very long-term goal. What might be short-term goals in there is maybe you get this policy changed. Maybe you change some behaviors. Maybe you change some technology or behaviors of individuals or of operations. So part of the challenge is to actually identify what measurable result we want. Go ahead, Sam.
We had a bunch of people type in some. Josh Bruce said alert staff to erosion, trash buildup, or sediment pollution events. Jeff Stillwell said an accepted water quality parameter that is precise and accurate to be significant to the level accepted QA. Karen Anderson said measure the impact of BMPs. Molly Troop said increasing or decreasing water quality trends over time for several parameters in our sites that are monitored. And Katie Rademacher, sorry about pronunciation, folks, said a river health grade in the form of a river report card. So those were all ones that came in through the question box.
Great examples. And I would challenge and invite each of you to continue the so what question with every one of those measurable. They're all measurable results. In fact, in my opinion, if you've been around for a year or two, just the fact that you're funded and you're actually monitoring is a measurable result, is a success story that we don't tell. If you know me, you know that I complain that our community doesn't tell enough about our success stories, both on the financial as well as on the environmental side and on the people impact side. But even with things like doing a report card, that's a product, that's an output. So what? Now how is that being used, and how is that actually restoring, protecting, what's the measurable outcome for producing that out? Maybe it's education and people know more and they're going to do X, Y, Z behavior. How you actually measure that might be different than how you actually monitor the quality of the water. So if we could do a better job at really identifying these short-term, long-terms and asking these so what questions, that's kind of, I'm not going to say it's easy, but it really is one of the tasks we really need to do better at. Thank you, everybody, for participating in that. If you are on, I'm on like page 1 of the handout right now. I'm actually going to, if you have the handout, I'm going to be running through things on page 2. In my 30 years working at a national, regional, state, and local scale, I've come to this, why did I bother to take 30 years of my career and help articulate what a study design is? I like to say that you design to resign. That if you could design such an effective program that you were no longer needed and you could resign and go to that island on the Bahamas you've wanted to go to, you should do it. So this is all about designing to resign. So what's the problem? Why aren't we doing it? These are the top challenges I hear over and over and over at a national level why volunteer monitoring or citizen science monitoring programs struggle. Volunteer recruitment or retention, the data they generate is not used or not used how they want, and they don't have consistent support in all kinds of resources. Because I work for a state agency and I'm heavily involved in that part of the world, the community, here's what I hear from, in particularly like the DNRs and the Clean Water Act agencies, what they struggle with working with our groups. Communication, and that's a big topic. Beliefs and biases and experiences they might have with groups. And that can range from they don't have any, so they have biases, to they've had good and bad experiences. And they too have limited resources or capacity to deal with. A lot of these agencies feel like they're barely making it. And while they want to do the right thing along with all of us, they're strapped. And they feel as if the information and the work we bring to them just makes them feel overburdened even more. Anyway, this is part of the problem. Now, a closer look at the volunteer monitoring citizen science side of things, these are the top 8 reasons I've found across the country that groups struggle. First of all, the first one is monitoring is the end. Groups get into a habit of they got equipment, and the actual monitoring becomes the end instead of a means to the end. They haven't really clarified where their data is going to go and the difference it's going to make in that measurable result story. They just go out and monitor, and that's it. And then that's when you get stuck with your data's not used and volunteer retention and recruitment, those kinds of things. So monitoring should never be the end. It should be the means to an end. There's not an integration with the overall vision for the watershed and the organization, and there's not alignment and communication within the organization and within the watershed, for example. I'm not going to solve all of these in this webinar, but a lot of them I will talk about. These are just the 8 problems I have found. We don't do a good job of aligning our study purpose with data uses, data users, the information needs out there, the information products we produce, and then results, outcomes, and impacts is what I abbreviate ROI, results, outcome, and impacts. I am going to talk about this one in this webinar. When those are aligned, you automatically produce measurable results. Often volunteer monitoring groups advocate our decision making, meaning we just collect the data. If we just give it to somebody, it's somebody else's job to do something with it. And I just disagree with that. In some cases, that's true, but in many cases, we have a whole lot of power that we give away. Often, if you don't do this right kind of study design planning, you're not targeting the right decision maker. You're targeting, say, a Clean Water Act agency, when maybe your power from bang for the buck is just to work directly with the farmers or directly with the population, directly with your resource before it ever gets to a regulatory environment. I'm not going to talk about this one today, but I could teach a whole class on it alone. And that's the difference between if your outcome and your result you want to be is a change in behavior. That's a very different approach than if you're actually trying to change, let's say, a policy or a regulation or a standard. If you're trying to get people to do something different, at some point throwing data at them is not the answer. But that's a big mistake people make. They monitor to change behavior, and it might be a step to it, but it can't be the final step to it. Groups don't deal with data management. That's a billywhack of its own. Maybe you manage your data and you have data, but you're not actually delivering or communicating it as information in the way a particular decision maker needs it. So then your data isn't used. And then finally, we do not, as a community, and I mean a collective community of all the regulatory agencies and everything in between that and grassroots groups, we don't really do a good job of evaluating our entire program. I'm really big on evaluation, and I will talk about that today. I'm going to argue that an effective, appropriate study design or monitoring plan, I use those as synonyms, includes evaluation. That an effective study design would address all of these things to a very large degree, and that's what I hope to share with you today. So now I want you to raise your hand if you think you have a study design or a monitoring plan. Whatever state it's in, however it's used or not used, raise your hand out of the 30 people online right now. Do you think you have a study design or monitoring plan if you're already monitoring?
Give folks a couple more seconds to raise their hand. And it looks like we have 6 out of 28, so about 7, 8. Okay. 8 out of 28, so about 28%.
And about 8 people said they were already monitoring. Okay. I'll give you a second to shut those hands down, Sam. And now you raise your hand if you feel like you evaluate. You 8 people, you 8 groups. Do you evaluate your entire monitoring program and design? Not just the data you're generating. Are you evaluating the entire program on some frequency more than once every 30 years?
So we're at 3 out of 28, 10%.
Okay.
4 out of 28.
That's not very many. When I was at the monitoring conference, the National Council's conference, and I asked this question to a room of about 60 to 70 people, about 2 hands went up. And that room was full of all kinds of people. So I think it's a problem we have in general, because it's not an easy thing to do, but I think we need to get better at it. So hopefully I just achieved, or I'm about to achieve, I'm about to explain to you my definition of a study design or a monitoring design, and how does it relate to measurable results. And I'm going to lump them into 4 key design areas and 5 building blocks. You'll see where that is. And those 4 design continuums, design areas, I don't think I don't have a really part of the handout, but it's okay. You don't really. What I'm about to share with you, what I'm calling these design elements, applies to everybody. I'm not going to overemphasize this, but I don't care if you're any one of these groups on the left. I don't care what you're monitoring, whether it's lakes, rivers, estuaries, wetlands, riparian zone, vegetation, rangeland. I've taught this to people who do nothing but monitor rangelands or vegetation of forests. It's a framework. It's a way to think about your work. It doesn't matter if you're monitoring chemistry, biology, you're using meters, and it doesn't matter what your data use is or who your users are. What I am about to share with you applies across the board. It's a best management practice, period. So an effective monitoring program or study design that produces measurable, trackable, identifiable outputs, results, outcomes, or impacts. So outputs are beans, you know, like river samples collected, people taught. You guys gave some good examples of outcomes and impacts you wanted. Here are the building blocks of every monitoring program. You need an active study design, a QA program, you need to manage your data, you need to deliver that, you need to evaluate it. If you're dealing with volunteer monitors, you need to have a management program for them. And I'm going to argue that an active study design designs each one of these building bricks. You're designing each one of these building bricks, and then you implement it. And most of us don't. Most of us might design part of this, but the rest of it's an afterthought, and we react, like data management. You don't design it. You just, the guy comes in and he knows how to do Quattro Pro, or he knows how to do Excel, and so you use him. But you didn't really design a data management system for the data you're generating. Now, that said, not all study designs need to be equal, and I want to emphasize this. Even if you have a study design that's not written down as informal, you still have one. So it depends on what your questions are and your outcomes are, whether you're going to be a rigorous study design. If you're going to do compliance and legal enforcement monitoring, you're going to be at a high rigor, compared to maybe just Stream Selfie of Isaac Walton League, where it's just getting people to engage with their river. You still have a study design along that continuum of rigor, no matter how long the duration of your study, the level of resources and complexity, the formality, written down or not written down. If you're going to address a spill and your job is to get the pipe turned off, guess what? You still have a study design. It's just very informal and the duration short, and you didn't need to write it down. And you had a great outcome. You got the pipe turned off, but you still had a study design. So I just want to say that even though I'm proposing you have a design, that it doesn't mean all designs are equal for all questions. So here's the way I break it down, or we break it down at the Water Data Collaborative, is there's basically 4 areas you are going to design for success, for measurable results: the program, the technical, the information design, and your evaluation design. And that's what I'm calling a study design or a monitoring plan or a monitoring program design in the context of this webinar. At a high level, the program design is all the who's, all the people. Who are you doing this for? Who are the decision makers? What are their information needs? Why am I doing this? What impact am I trying to have? And all of that information should drive then the technical design, which is what I monitor when, where, and how, and what the quality of the data needs to be to answer those questions. And I'm going to manage my data in this technical design. This is where I do raw data management to get it to a verified data management state. Once I have that data, then the information design is how do I analyze that data? How do I interpret it? How do I report it? How do I create a water report card, a GIS model? Anything you create, a report, a storyboard, a GIS map interactive to look at your data, all the statistics and the analysis, all of those are what I'm calling information products in the information design. And then there's the evaluation design. How do I know I answered my monitoring question? How do I know that this design, this plan will work? And how will I know it? We're going to spend some hands-on activities in these red areas because those are the weaknesses. There's a ton of information out there on the technical design, on information design. These are the areas I find that we don't spend enough time on. So now I've kind of given you what is a study design, how does it relate to producing measurable results. We're going to go deeper into that. 4 key design areas are those 4. Now I want to show you how to align your monitoring purpose, your management uses, data users, and their information needs to produce results, outcomes, and impacts. But I'm going to back up a minute and kind of characterize what we usually do. Because what we usually do isn't wrong, we're just not really planning it out very well. I call this a spit bath assessment. And you know, when you take a spit bath, you're just getting the key spots on your body, right, rather than washing everywhere. But typically what we do is we have some expectation of our water body. We expect it's dirty, we expect it's clean, we're not sure if it's impacted. We have this expectation that we turn into a monitoring question. And then we go out and we monitor to see what's actually going on. Then we try to answer this question: what is the current condition compared with what I want or what I'm expecting? And we basically make a decision that, well, I thought this was clean and it's not, it's impaired, I need to restore it. Or, oh my goodness, it's high quality and I need to protect it. And that's what we call our monitoring design. And what I'm about to teach you, we're not going to lose any of this, we're just going to make this a little more robust. Another way to look at what we do is we have some question, number 2 over here, this ecological, where my mouse is. What's my question, my monitoring question? And I need to design a study that weeds out all the natural factors and variability so that I can have an accurate understanding of things I can actually do, management decisions, actions I can take that would impact the things that we can control. I can't control nature, but what can I control? And often that's kind of the context of our study design or our monitoring design. Hopefully you're finding yourself in one of these 2 scenarios. And here's what the problem is with what all of us do. And this isn't a volunteer monitoring problem. This is also a health department problem. When we do a monitoring design, we're not very good at defining terms. What is healthy? If my monitoring question is my water is healthy, if I don't define healthy, how can I turn that into a measurable result? Because what healthy means to me may not be the same thing it means to my neighbor or to the county board or to the State Clean Water Act Agency or to the Fish and Wildlife Service. I'm inviting you to define these terms, and even though they're a moving target, if you define them, then you have a measurable result. It's all these ambiguous terms. What's restore? What's impaired? What's natural? What's possible? I mean, in Colorado, we have a lot of rivers that are trout streams right now, but historically they were blown out braided rivers. So if we're going to restore them to what they used to be, people don't want a blown out braided river in their backyard. They want the trout stream. So it's worth going through the effort of defining these. And if you evaluate, you can modify your definition, but you always know what you're measuring yourself against. This is just one example of something we do in the study design I do. At best, most of us generate a lot of data. We're data rich, but we're information poor. And I don't know about you, but in my 30 years, I have felt like all of these people on this screen here at some point. I mean, I started in 1989 before there was even laptop computers, and I've gone to a pretty sophisticated database. So I've definitely felt like some of these people, and I'm guessing you probably have too. So let's talk about how we align our purpose, our management use, our data users, and information needs. In this continuum here, there's about 4 continuums that I like to talk about that if you can align them with each one of your monitoring questions, you can produce measurable results. So let's talk about the first continuum of study purposes. These are the reasons you would go out. And when you're doing water monitoring, these actually cover most of the uses. Condition trend says, I want to know the condition of my river. I want to collect enough trend data to know if the trend of quality in a particular parameter or fishery is going up or down. I want to know the impact assessment. What is the impact of this development, of this restoration of this treatment plant, an impact of something. Effectiveness monitoring is a purpose where you've done something, I've restored something, and I want to know if it made a difference. We've changed this behavior, we've changed this treatment, does it make a difference? And then use support can be formal or informal. Informal is a version of everyone around the community knows not to swim in the pond if it looks like whatever. That's informal. Formal would be a Clean Water Act beneficial use. Use support and condition are closely related, but they're a little different. So there's this continuum of reasons you're going to collect data. I'm hoping you're all agreeing and can find at least one of those for yourself on there. Then once you've got that purpose, there's somebody who's going to make a decision about that data, about that study purpose. And this is what I call uses or management decisions. And that continuum ranges from education all the way down to legal compliance. Your 305B Clean Water Act planning is in this advocacy planning area. If you're just trying to get the community to understand what's going, community inquiry and education, you just want people to be connected to their river and water and where it comes from and the quality of it and their impact on it. So there's a range of uses and management decisions that you can pick from. Then you go down here to the continuum of users. From children, youth, to adults, to farmers. There's no such thing as general public. And I haven't listed them all here, but you get a sense of there's a bunch of different users out there that you would like to be involved with your monitoring program. And then the last continuum is the continuum of results, outcomes, and impacts. Do you want to have a behavior change? Do you want to make sure the uses are met? Is it a regulatory or policy? You want to change a standard? You want to increase environmental health? You want to bring more money to the riverfront walkway? Is it an economic thing? So these are all these continuums, and where information and products come into play is these users. Each one of these users often requires a different information product. Even if they're using the same data, how you might bring that data to a state regulatory agency, and that information is probably very different than you would bring it to a K through 12 classroom. And how you evaluate down here your results, outcomes, and impacts. So if you were to draw a line, lining up all these continuums for each one of your monitoring questions, you would have what I call a data pathway, or what I like to call it information blueprint, that I'm creating information. I'm not generating data, I'm generating information, and I have a blueprint that I could actually design my study around. And I'll give you an example from my program. If I use one of our monitoring questions, which is the same as the Clean Water Act, are my rivers healthy? That's a use support question because I'm using the Clean Water Act. It goes in the 305B, 303D, that's a planning activity, assessment and planning. It's done by the state agency in Colorado. I'm down there on the continuum of users. And the outcome, one outcome is the uses are met. Now I can draw about 8 or 9 lines like this and make sure that my study design honors each one of these data paths. And I'm going to show you some more ways to do that. I want to pause for a second and let you guys absorb this and see if there's any questions on these continuums and the idea that if you line these up, you actually have a study design and some measurable results.
And folks, just a reminder, if you have any questions when we pause for questions, feel free to raise your hand and we can unmute you. Otherwise, if you ever have a question that pops in your head, feel free to type it into the question box. And if it's relevant for what Barb is talking about right now, I can interrupt her and ask a question because we want to make sure this is interactive for folks.
Because I'm going to go into this a little deeper to show you actually how to do it.
So I'm not seeing any questions right now, Barb.
Okay, great. Okay, either they're awake or they're fully engaged or somewhere in between. So I just show you, go ahead, Sam.
No, that's it.
Nope.
Go ahead.
Okay. I just showed you how to align your purpose, management use, data users, and information needs. Maybe that was a lesson for you right there, is I find even in state agencies that people don't even know how to distinguish between, sometimes people don't even know how to distinguish between, I'm trying to get fancy and I'm not doing a good job, between these things right here. You know, people don't even know how to distinguish between those things right there. So now what I want to do is go from, how do we take this and go from a simple monitoring question to measurable results to go a little deeper. Now I don't really know how not to use this pen. Okay. So everything I'm talking about now is in this program design, the who and the why and the info needs. On your page 1 of your handout, there was a table that I was going to ask you. I asked you if you had a monitoring question earlier at the beginning of this. And for that particular monitoring question, I want you to fill out the 4 columns or 5 columns there. What's your study purpose? Pick one data use or management use. Pick one data user and one information product that that data user gets and an impact or outcome you want from that. And we're going to keep going back to this one example. If you get this one example, then you can do many of them for all your monitoring questions. And I want to honor that you might have more than one study purpose, more than one management decision, more than one data user for a particular monitoring question. So I'm going to give you a minute to fill that out. Hopefully you're wrapping up. Again, all you need is one example in order to understand what I'm trying to teach you. And then you can find it as we go into this a little deeper. So what I'm going to do now is take each one of those continuums and look at it a little different way. I'm going to look at it in a matrix now. So my monitoring question is, are my rivers healthy? And that's a common one out there. And I'm going to use my program as an example. Down here on the left column is just that continuum of study purposes, from condition and trend to impact. I've broken down impact investigation to non-point source and point source. You don't have to. Sometimes you're actually investigating a particular pollutant coming from non-point source or point source. Effectiveness, and then use support. So for the example, my program I gave you, we use the Clean Water Act, so my data study purpose is use support. Now across the top, on the top columns, is the second continuum, data uses, decisions or management uses, and I lump them into 3 kind of categories: education, community inquiry, community or agency advocacy or planning. That's where your county government comes in, all regulations, Clean Water Act, districts that might do transportation and water development. And on the far end is that compliance, enforcement, legal kind of thing. So there is kind of a rigorous continuum here, but that's the second continuum of data uses. And for Riverwatch, because we have teachers in our program, one of our uses is education, and our data goes right to the Clean Water Act agency. So simultaneously, we are also over in the agency advocacy planning. Now I'm going to go down to the third continuum of data users, and for us, there's the Riverwatch volunteers. There's the Clean Water Act agency and the actual individual watershed groups that we work with. Now, just from this view alone, I think you guys can appreciate we're collecting the same data. We have the same study design that goes to these data uses, But the information products that I generate for the volunteers is very different than I do for the Clean Water Act agency. My information design is really different. And we have others. Like I said, I've got about 8 of them I can put on this matrix and make sure that I actually have a measurable result, a data path for all of them. So I just want to spend 20 seconds on users. Who are the users and decision makers? It's going to vary across the board depending on what you do. I just want you to identify them. It could be just you and your constituents. Maybe you are a nonprofit and you have a board. Maybe you're funded by some landowners or water users. Maybe it's a federal, state government official. Maybe it's a stakeholder group. Maybe it's a combination of these. If we don't identify who our decision makers, who is actually going to make decisions about the data we're generating and what information do they need, then how do you know what to collect? How can you expect them to use your data if you haven't figured out what they need? Now, the slippery slope here is not all of them know what they need. And so you have to sort of invent it as you go and help them help yourselves. But you got to at least understand the decisions you want the data to go. You're doing a report card, great. If the report card says X, Y, Z, who's going to make decisions about that? Are you advocating that to somebody else? Or do you actually, your organization, want to actually take that further and make decisions? And who is that? Who are they? And are you getting information to help them make the decisions they need to make? And then there's that last continuum, the results, outcomes, and impacts continuum. This is what I want you to answer. Because you collected this data and you answered that monitoring question, are my rivers healthy? Yes or no, whatever river you're looking at. Specific to your data users and decisions, what impact do you want to have? Do you want them to protect it, to change a regulation, to change a standard, etc.? Maybe they change the way they use the water, so forth. What is your, you got to identify what the outcome is and impact, short-term and long-term, both, so you can see measure your progress towards it. So I'm going to give you a chance to update anything on your worksheet here, or maybe just look at it and know, yeah, I'm on the right path. That I understand what Barb just said in connecting these things and how they might relate to measurable results. And just putting up this view again, just to reiterate, for every monitoring question, you could actually, again, draw that data path. And I would expect most of you would have multiple data paths. But if you start to line these out and identify them, then you can make sure your study design in its entirety produces a measurable result. Because all we're talking about right now is the people design, the why, the who, that very first one. The very first design. And what happens in that very top design, the who, should drive all of the other designs, the technical, the information, and the evaluation. So now I'm going to spend a minute on what are my information needs and my information products, because I think we struggle for this. And so I've got some worksheets and some tools to help you do that. I'm just going to show you a few of them. And this particular table, if you have the worksheet, is on page 4. If you can't see it on the screen very well. So if you were to figure out, you've identified in your little table the decision makers that you're going to. These are the kinds of questions you want to ask that decision maker, and maybe you need to help them define it if they don't know it. But what decisions are they going to make? What indicators do they need? In what media? Where do they need it from? Maybe they have some political or historical stations that you don't know about. What benchmarks and references are they using? Are they using EPAs? Are they using a Clean Water Act? Are they using a local informal one? Are they using a tribal one? Are they using one that you guys need to make up because there's not one that exists? You can kind of read these yourself, but you're actually involving them in figuring out what information do they need, so you know what information you need to generate. That's your information design, so that you make sure your technical design generates it. And then you can measure whether you did or didn't, And anyone who's monitored out there knows that you actually raise more questions than you ever answer. And to me, that is a success story. It's always a success story. As we learned this, we didn't know we need to do that. Let's tell that story. Now we're evaluating our program, and we're going to adjust what we're doing, where we're doing, how we're doing it to answer those questions. And we know we're going to raise some more questions. That sort of iterative evaluation and monitoring design adjustment is a success story that we don't tell very well. Anyway, here's an information worksheet, and it tells you kind of where in the design it goes. For example, the third one, where do you need it from? That would be part of the technical design. Where do I go? Another way to look at your information needs and your information products are, what does your decision maker need? What endpoint do they need? So in my program, our Clean Water Act agency does not want anything but raw data. That raw data we give them, they combine with all the other data they have for a particular water body ID, and then they do their assessment. They don't want us to analyze it. They don't want us to interpret it or make recommendations because they're going to do that. So the information product, the measurable outcome of that, or output, is the raw data we upload to their data call every year. We also upload our data every year to the National Water Quality Portal. We have one of the most, if not the top, number of results in the portal as a volunteer monitoring group. Now, maybe your group wants the data analyzed. Our adult groups, they don't want the raw data. They want us to analyze it. So we create these little watershed reports. We analyze it the same way the health department does, but only with their data. And we give them our interpretation and let them make their own recommendation off of it. So the information product for those users is a watershed report. So I think you get the idea as you're designing different information delivery exit points depending on what your decision makers need. So again, you could modify your information product column here for the particular user you chose. Just going kind of back to that exercise. And then I'm recapping, basically. I hope you're getting at some deep sense that the program design is the kicker. It's everything that should drive what you do, where you do, how you do it, the data quality that's needed, how you need to manage your raw data in order to produce the various information products and deliver and communicate those. And then that's exactly what you're evaluating. And if you evaluate it, you now have a story to tell. You have a measurable result to measure and to tell. So now, I'm just going to go into a little bit of depth overview on what the Water Data Collaborative is putting into their training modules in these different designs. And the reds there are, you'll see that they're things that I think groups are weak on. So part of the who and the why for me is you have a shared vision and a shared outcomes with whoever's involved in this monitoring plan. And you identify results, impacts, and this value alignment with the organization and with your constituents. Who needs to be involved? And if you are working with volunteers, this is where you have a volunteer management program. Your volunteer program should be designed to serve your data objectives and not vice versa. And this is one of the reasons folks have trouble getting their data used and with retention and recruitment, because they go out and they just do this good stuff to make their volunteers feel good, but the data they were collecting really didn't have any data objectives. So if the monitoring program is in service of a design, a vision of clear data objectives, then you'll have a better time with retention, recruitment, and getting your data used. Of course, in the who and why, you're looking at what's the geographic scope, the existing data that's out there, threats and opportunities to your water body, what policy and legislations. I mean, again, you may not need this much rigor, but we ask these kinds of questions, and you get to decide the rigor you need for whatever you're doing. But this is the kind of information that is answered in the who and why. Furthermore, in the who and why, you figure out your monitoring reasons. Oops, sorry about that. Again, what is the role in those reasons in the organization's vision and outcomes? All of these blue arrows show you those continuums we looked at. Where on the continuum, what study purposes are you doing? What are your management uses? Number 3C, who are your decision makers and the users for that? And what are those information needs? And what's the data quality that they need? This is very iterative. I teach a whole class on how you might summarize this using the logic model and what I call an information blueprint or an FAQ on what your study design is. And at the end of each one of these little training units we have, we're always looking at, all right, here's what you want to do, but what's your capacity? What are your priorities? What might the budget be? How is this scalable? And how might you communicate this? Then you take all of that information to the technical design, and this is the classic stuff most of you out there already know. What am I going to monitor? And these are some of the things that you would put down that you're going to monitor. You know, water body activity, this stuff. Where do I monitor? When do I monitor? This is where you do your quality assurance plan, your sample operating procedures. How are you going to fulfill all those data quality things? Who's doing all this work? Dealing with access and transportation and safety. What's the plan for that? And then here's where you have an entire data management plan. Your entire data management plan here, and I have examples of data management plans. I've lost my mouse. Don't you hate that? Okay. Many groups, the data don't get used problem is because they haven't managed their data. So in the Water Data Collaborative, we like to put you in one of these camps. Maybe you're collecting data and you're in camp 1 here where it's not really organized. It's in an Excel spreadsheet. It's in filing cabinets. It's in raw data sheets. And so it's really not being maximized to make a difference. Maybe you're in camp 2 where your data is organized, but it's not really shared. Certainly not shared or being used even amongst yourselves in the way it could, much less with other people if they had access to it. Or maybe you're in camp 3 where you're sharing your data. Maybe you're uploading it to your website, maybe to the portal, but it's just not at the potential that you'd like it to be in order to make the difference you want. So we call this data readiness, and we help you evaluate where you are along this continuum and to get where you need to be. That's all in your data management. In the data management plan, this is an example of one of the things you do is you begin to map every indicator from its birth to its death. It's birthed by you generating it, you collecting it, and it dies when it the sample's thrown out and the result is in your archived data repository. And so for Riverwatch, this whole thing here would be a map of our metadata. Things like organization information, participant information, station information, and these little boxes here that didn't come through, but I let that go because all those boxes do is tell me the steps I need to go to, and the very last box down here is how it ends up in my data repository. And this here is our field data, things like pH and temperature, and this here is our metals and nutrient data that go through a lab. And this here is our macroinvertebrate data mapped from birth to death. And this here is our physical habitat data. So I mapped that out, and this is exactly what I did before I gave it to someone who knows how to build databases, because I knew exactly what I was creating and what the validation, everything needed to be to get it to the repository, and then they built the database. I didn't need to know all that. They built a pretty sophisticated database with it. That's one of the things you do in the data management plan work. Now your data is in the repository and you've generated it and it's the right quality. Now you're going to design your information. And you decide then, at this point, you finalize what information products you need to generate. From raw data to advanced modeling, data that goes into models and everything in between. How much of it do you need to analyze and summarize, and how are you going to do that? Are you going to do interpretations and conclusions and make recommendations or not? How are you going to deliver all those information products? This is a communication plan that you can evaluate and is a measurable result. And then designing data management to produce those information products is the second part of your data management plan. And I want to emphasize that managing data for information products is a completely different beast than managing your raw data to get it to a verified, validated state. They're both important, and you want to plan for both. And of course, who's involved in that? And capacity and price. That's the information design at a high level. We already kind of went over that. This is kind of what happens in the overall data management plan. We're up here. This is the technical design. You've managed your raw data. Then you've planned out how you're going to do those steps there. You produce your information products. You deliver and communicate it. And then you evaluate it. And now you have a success story to tell and measurable results to mark in order to know where you're hitting your mark or not. So I map a data pathway for every indicator all the way through all of this, all the way through evaluation and how I'm going to evaluate it. I design that evaluation. So here's where I'm going to make a plug for treating your data as an asset. It's not the means, right? It's a means to an end. It's not the end. And if you really want to create an asset, you're going to create something that somebody can use over and over again. An asset is a valued piece of property. And a data becomes an asset if it can be found, if it's available, if it's accessible, if people can find it, it's discoverable, and they can share it, and it's in a format-friendly format. But it also has to contain enough information to inform the user of why you collected it, what the questions you asked, what are the quality, and what are the methods you use, so they know they can use it again or not. And most of us do not take the time to document this kind of stuff and share it. So then our data is used one time. I want to challenge everybody that I work with in my career to say that data needs to be used more than one time. You need to think of it as a forever song. What do I mean by a forever song? You all can think of a forever song, and this came to me when I was watching Jay-Z being interviewed by David Letterman, and Jay-Z says, every musician wants to create a forever song, and a forever song is that song that lives on generation after generation, and is played decade after decade. I mean, the classic one might be Happy Birthday, but you can all think of a song by some of these musicians even here that's been around a long time. And don't you want your data to be used a long time? I mean, I think of some of the data sets we're using for climate change. I guarantee you the people that started to collect that data, one temperature reading a day for 30 years, never knew how it's being used today, the value of it. So I want you to think about the legacy that you're leaving, even with a very simple study design that you might have. I can give you an example from our program, because you really don't know. We can't be everywhere all the time doing everything like Superman, but we really want to be doing it anyway. And in my program here, most of you might remember this Gold King spill. The Animas River is right out my back door. And it was the Riverwatch data. This is when the river turned, I say, the color of Harry Potter's butterbeer from the Gold King spill in 2015. It was our data, citizen science data, because we monitored way down below the site, the actual where the spill occurred. We had been monitoring for 20-some years. And the EPA used our data, not the USGS's data, not their own data, not the health department, because it didn't exist. Because we were collecting baseline data, they used our data to determine when the river had come back to its original pre-spill conditions. Did I plan on that? No. But I believed in the value of baseline data that nobody wants it. Nobody wants to pay for it. But everybody wants it, and you never know when it's going to be used. So our data set is an asset in that. So I invite you to do that, to treat your data like an asset. And then finally, the last module, evaluation design. What goes into that? Most people think of evaluation as I'm evaluating my methods and my QA plan. You need to do that. You need to do all of that, but that's not evaluating the entire program, your whole study design. How do you know when you've answered your monitoring question? Even the health departments don't do this. You got to realize the health departments, Clean Water Act agencies, the study design is really done for them by the EPA and the Clean Water Act. So that's part of the reason they struggle with knowing what citizen science groups want, because they don't realize that half of the study design is done for them. They're told what to collect, when and how and where, and the quality. They're even told the information design, how to report it to the National Water Quality Portal. So they don't often realize that grassroots groups are starting from scratch, and they don't even know the help that they need to give in creating a study design because so much of it's done for them. But none of us really take the time to say, when am I going to answer this monitoring question? Even if I can't fully answer it, what can I answer? When can I answer that? And what else do I need to know? And I'm going to document that, and that's a success story. That's a measurable point at which you can measure something. So you're going to design, actually, how you're going to, the effectiveness of your design and implementation. And this is where you, if you do this right, you actually capture and document success stories and where you changed. And you're not that guy who leaves. You just quit and you leave your organization, and nobody has any idea why you did what you did. Or maybe you're the person who's sitting there and inherited somebody's program, and you don't have any idea because they didn't document it. I am a huge believer in documentation. All right, so that's the evaluation design. So now I'm going back to this slide, and I'm hoping you see that an effective study design that produces measurable, trackable, identifiable outputs, results, and impacts has all these building blocks, but they're designed before you implement it. And then just going back to this view of the same thing, kind of just allowing it to sink in again. And by the way, all of these steps in some version are on page 7 of the handout or the workbook that go through program design, technical design, all those little charts I just put up. Now I'm going to wow you with this big framework. There's a lot of information here, but you don't even really need to know the details. This is the framework that the Water Data Collaborative is using to organize its training services and products around. And by the way, most of its training services and products are things that already exist out there that we're trying to make more accessible or build on. We're only creating products and services where we know there are gaps. So I really, really want to emphasize this. This is not a new group of people creating some new shiny thing at all. In fact, quite the opposite. But let me help you interpret this. How do you go from a study design or a plan to actual implementation? And on the collaborative's framework here, I must be still on the pin thing or something. Hang on a second. There we go. Step 1 here is the study design. It's the plan. It's everything I've just been talking about. And we had to fight to advocate that one of the reasons people aren't doing great data management and getting data into these hubs and these portals is because there's no plan to do it, and their data is all over the place. So we are a huge advocate of study design and providing resources to help people get there at whatever rigor and formality they need to. So there's the plan. Now when you actually go out and start to implement, you're collecting data. Step 2 is tools and resources that help you collect the right data. And that's, should I be using this SONS or this equipment, or what equipment do I need to get the quality I need to do the what, when, where's, and how's? And you store your data, the data management. That's all in the technical design. Then everything else on this flow chart is really focused on the information design, tools and things that are out there to help you visualize your data sets in this step 4. How do you take that communication plan to modeling, to planning, to any of those things you need to there to action? Subsets of that are, what are some of the data portals that you could put your data in to make it be an asset and shared and discovered? And then what are all these tools out there that help you analyze and visualize? We're actually trying to deliver those to you in a way that's easy for you to digest and meet your goals. Things like the Clean Water Hub and Stream Selfie and the Data Water Reporter and other tools you might know about would all fit in this sort of technical design. And then finally, along the bottom, almost not even visual, is the evaluation, adaptive management. You've implemented all this. How do you go back and go all the way back up to your design and adapt that and adjust that to continue your next rounds. This framework is available in more detail on the collaboratives.org site if you want to look at it more, and I believe it's on page 8 of your handout. What the collaborative is trying to create then is what we're calling right now a service training platform, where we can deliver some real specific training to meet you where you are in these different areas, these different designs. And the way we're looking at it right now is we would have you evaluate. You'd go through an evaluation of where you're at, and that evaluation would spit out and tell you what you need. Which one of these modules do you need? And think of these modules as the program design, module 2 is the technical design, module 3 is the information design, the evaluation design, and this 5th module is a lot of material on volunteer management and what are the best management practices in volunteer management. All of these modules are the best of the best. And as you go through one of these modules in this platform, these are some of the things you might produce. An actual study design, a quality assurance plan, a data management plan, all the things that I've been sharing with you. And then it's also our goal that we start to begin to collect an actual repository of these documents. Wouldn't it be nice if I could go to a QAP that had my same monitoring question and the quality wanted, and I could just find one and maybe then use it and customize it, or a data management plan that I could at least see what they're doing and I could then easily write one? It's our goal to create a repository of some of these things, again, so we don't have to keep reinventing the wheel, and we can get a more common lexicon going amongst us. Some of you might be familiar with the National Water Quality Monitoring Council's NEMI database. That's the National Environmental Methods Index, where there's this big library and queryable, searchable database of all the methods out there. That if you want to know about a certain method that matches up your quality or not, you can search this database for it. That's what we're modeling this document repository after. This is one of our visions in the Water Data Collaborative, and I hope at some sense, again, we're not reinventing the wheel. We hope to serve up local resources. For example, let's say in Module 2, there's an EPA region, actually, the technical design loans out equipment. Well, because you put in your information, if there are regional and state services that help you do your technical design, we'd be serving that up to you because we know where you're from. Each one of these modules, you'd have some sort of certificate of completion that you can actually document you went through this. So that's one of our visions I'm sharing with you here. And the last thing I kind of want to cover before we open it up to discussions and questions is this idea of the cog and wheel analogy that you may have seen or heard before. If you look to the left of the dotted yellow line, think of these circles as one of two things. One view might be you're in a particular watershed, let's say, and the red circle is you, a citizen science program, and maybe the purple circle is some nonprofit, and the yellow circle maybe is the health department or the USGS or somebody else. So there are different studies going on in the same watershed, and they're really not connected. No one's talking to each other. Nobody knows if there's overlap or redundancy, or nobody even knows perhaps the value, if there's not redundancy, the value of the other that might even help them do their work. And when you start to do this study design work and you actually look at, say, existing data, by the way, you can take data that you're using from somebody else through the same process, asking if it's the right data and quality for your question. It's not just data you might generate. But if you were to do this kind of planning and communication, you'd have what's to the right of this dotted line, which is the cog and the wheel, where all of these studies have communicated to each other, and everybody kind of knows where the overlap is and where the uniqueness is and their value and contribution to the overall watershed. You know, a really good example of that might be in my basin. We've got a couple hotspot stations in my state, and I know each of you do as well, that everyone knows there's a problem, and everybody and their mother is out collecting a bottle, to the degree you might even joke that there's no river left for them to sample because nobody trusts anybody. And I often have people come to me and say, well, why are you there? You're just duplicating. But I can say back to them that one of our objectives is to give people a hands-on stewardship experience that nobody else is doing. And because I have that unique role in our program, we're going to keep dipping a bottle here. And the redundancy really is in you guys not trusting each other's data. The other way to look at this might be your own disparate monitoring programs or activities in your own organization. Like maybe the red is your E. coli program, and the purple is your, I don't know, get people to change how they fertilize their lawns program, and the yellow is another program, and you don't really know how they interrelate, but they might all be monitoring, and they might all have the same audience they're targeting. You need to get them in a way that they're on a cog and a wheel and working together for the overall organization, and it should help your funding. So that's this concept of thinking this through. Another thing you can start to do once you've mapped yourself out on these continuums, remember this column here is the data purpose continuum, and across the top is your uses or decisions, and then you fill it in by your users and their information needs and the outcomes from using them. You can start to make tables like this. If each one of these boxes is a particular assessment type, so if I was to look at, for example, if I was to put an X right here, this might be an assessment type A1 because there's A and 1. Over here, I've got two A2s. I've got an A2 that's a target audience here and an A2 that's a target audience here. I just share that with you because of the next views. Here are all my assessment types across the top. And down on the right, on the left are my stations. And now I can start to identify every one of my stations, what assessment type are they contributing to? So my boss comes in and says, we've got to cut out some stations, or we're not going to fund the gauge at Jones Creek anymore. I can tell him, well, you're going to affect all of these 3 studies now. Do you want to do that? You can start to have these conversations when you've mapped things out like this. Same conversation, but now you're looking at parameters. All the parameters that I'm using in different assessment types that are going to different people. And by the way, you can be collecting dissolved oxygen the same way for every one of these assessment types. And you can also have different methods. I think you're getting the picture. This is the same way for information products. These are just information products. How many of these information products are related to these different combinations of purpose and users and uses? This is by benchmark. Different benchmarks need what kind of data? And I'm using these benchmarks in what kind of reports? And I like to put this one out here, the modified one, is maybe you're using a standard sediment criteria from the health department, but you've modified it for your use. So you can be transparent about what you're doing and what you're not doing. I'm going to skip that one. So we're at a good stopping point here, and just to review what I've gone over, I wanted you to understand what the Water Data Collaborative is. I hope you know a little bit more about what we're calling study design or monitoring design and how it relates to producing measurable results. The 4 key design areas are the program, the technical, the information, and evaluation. Those continuums of how you would align purpose, uses, users, and information needs, how you would even find information needs. How you would go from a monitoring question. So you could map out all of this for each monitoring question and get to a result, outcome, or impact that you could measure. And then how you might find information needs. Just to let you know, the collaborative did a webinar on an overview of what we're up to, and that's recorded and available on the website already. If you're interested in what we're doing, there are 2 more webinars. The dates are up there. You can register at waterdatacollaborative.org. One is on actionable projects in your watershed and looking closer at Water Reporter and Stream Selfies and the Clean Water Hub, along with conquering your the data management monster tools and gaps that we have found that we're building. Sam, do you want to say something about these webinars that I might have just screwed up?
Yeah, sure. So the building a bridge from monitoring to action, that one is really taking the data that we're gathering and doing some actionable items and data analysis, and that's with the Chesapeake Conservancy folks. So they're going to walk us through what they're doing and how it can be applicable on a national level. And then conquering your data management monster on April 30th, that one is going to be more about our data management tools. So our distributed database that Adam Griggs has built, as well as the Clean Water Hub and Water Reporter, and how those tools can be used for data management and what best practices they have for data management there.
Thank you. And in your handout, because I like to give a lot of information because I never know, I want to help somebody out there. Page 9 has some resources for citizen science efforts. And those links should all work. Page 10 has the learning objectives. It's got a version of that matrix with data purposes and data users. Page 11 is my example of an information blueprint, how you might summarize a particular monitoring program that you have by assessment type, by that combination of a data purpose, a data use, and your monitoring question. And I use this all the time, and I got an example on my website of these are the kinds of things that I answer. I can hand it out to somebody and say, this is what we're doing and this is what we're not doing. If you'll notice down towards the bottom, there is an evaluation date. There's assumptions and external factors that I make, like assumptions are I have my funding for X number of years, that the regulation doesn't change from this to that. Number 15, I've left a place for those ambiguous terms like restore and healthy. And then for certain audiences, they want to know how much this particular monitoring question's costing, and I've got an estimated budget item. So that's what I call an information blueprint, that you'd summarize basically all the information that comes out of that program phase design. And then step 12 is the Cog and Wheel Analogy, and then some routine questions that you can ask in addition to some of the information needs of a targeted decision maker. So with that, I'm going to be quiet for a minute, and if there's any verbal, written chat comments or questions, please do share. And know that I'm available. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might come up with later. I should have put my email on here, but I didn't. But I think it's on the very first slide. My email's on the very first slide. Actually, I can go to that slide while people are asking questions.
Yeah, so folks, feel free to raise a hand, and we will, I can unmute you, or you can type your questions. Also, all of our contact info, you can find it on the Water Data Collaborative website as well. And I typed waterdatacollaborative.org into the chat box, but it's also in the handout from Barb as well. And she has her slide up with her contact info.
Perfect. Thanks, Sam.
So I'm not seeing any raised hands or questions. We'll give folks a few more seconds here. Feel free to raise a hand if you're typing something long and want me to not close this out on you. But we're always available to answer questions offline as well.
Hopefully there was something valuable in here for you.
All right, I'm not seeing any questions. So stay tuned for more from the Water Data Collaborative. Please tune in to our other webinars as well to see what we're doing across the volunteer monitoring sector. There's also on waterdatacollaborative.org a contact us, site portion there where you can fill out your information, and if you have a direct inquiry, you can send it our way and we can help answer those questions or connect you. Let's see, it looks like Claire has a raised hand, so I'm going to unmute you, Claire.
Hi there, guys.
Go ahead.
So based in the Delaware and being a big funder, but also being sort of stretched for funding. Just curious, I mean, if we were to have a discussion with you guys about engaging and getting your input into really assisting make our citizen science efforts more robust, what would it take? I mean, how available are you to assist? Would you need to get a grant from us? I'm not quite sure how any of that would work, and I'd be happy to follow up offline with you.
That's a great question, Claire. I mean, right now we're solely funded by Pisces Foundation, and we're hoping to get funded in one more phase where we're actually building this, finishing up things, making the Clean Water Hub and some of the gaps that we found in the tools we have built more available, including building this service training portal, if you will, or the whole thing I showed on that slide. And everyone, let's see how do I say this. So we're not fully funded. We actually, one of the things we're working really hard on is a sustainability model that how can we keep this going and reaching out to existing hubs, people hubs and data hubs, and leverage them and give them what they need. Again, we're not trying to reinvent wheels. Mm-hmm. How might we co-collaborate with them on funding efforts to bring some of this to that local area? So I think you answered your own question. We probably would need to do something joint. I'll just be quiet there with that, is we're really kind of figuring it out, but we got a lot of inertia and a lot of support behind us.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, let's follow up offline. I mean, I think we have the same questions, and I think it's probably a discussion about getting aligned, because we have some of the pieces, but not all the pieces. I think we could certainly get better with sort of some kind of partnership with you going forward.
Great.
All right, let's see. Any more questions coming in? I'm not seeing any new ones, and I'm not seeing any more hands raised. So feel free to reach out to us.
I just want to thank everybody, Sam. I just want to thank everybody for their attention and all the work they do out there. It makes a difference, and I'm really grateful for it. And thank you, Sam, for hosting this.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all, and this will be recorded on the website, so feel free to share it within your networks as well.